Hello and welcome back. It's wonderful to be with you here today. I'm Lisa Ingalls Witter, and we are continuing our discussion today with the Four Noble Truths. The last couple times we've met, we've talked about first we talked really about Buddha's story and how it's a model, how it can be a model for living our own lives. And then yesterday we went into the first two noble truths. And if you didn't catch that, if you're just catching up, I invite you to actually like or become a fan, I guess it is, of my Facebook page, Lisa Ingalls Witter, where all of these discussions, these videos are posted on my Facebook page, and you'll get notified if I go live on my page, which I do often, and we can continue this discussion together. The other place that you can find the replays of these discussions, of these videos, is over on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, which is Lisa Ingalls. So if you subscribe to that channel, you will also get notified there when I post the most updated replay as well. But I do invite you, because this is a continuing and ongoing discussion, to check out those other videos. They're short, and the idea here is not to go super deep into philosophy, but to discover how can we take these practices from ancient teachings, whether they're Buddhism or Hinduism or Kabbalah or wherever they might come from, Sufism, and how can we integrate them into our modern lives. There's so much wisdom in tradition without being dogmatic. We can pull the teachings, and I'm currently working with my teacher. Her name is Isa Gadarchi, and one of the ways that she describes Buddhism, and it's been described this way before, is that Buddhism isn't a religion. Buddhism is really a method of training, right? It's a method, it's a way, it's sort of like a formula for a way to live our lives so that we can be free from suffering, which was what Buddha's very first teaching were, the Four Noble Truths. So again, please do go back and look at those replays to catch up a little bit. But let's see, just to give us a background of where we were coming from last time, and the first two noble truths. And the first noble truth is that there is suffering, right? That we exist, existence is suffering. There is suffering, and we have to deal with it. And that we can find our way out of suffering. And what is the root cause of suffering? That's what we looked at yesterday, the root cause of suffering. And what we talked about is that there are actually three causes of suffering, right? The first cause of suffering can be either physical or emotional pain. That's sort of an obvious one, you know, like you break your arm, there's pain, you have suffering from it. You get a divorce, you lose a beloved, there's emotional pain from that, you suffer from it. And then we talked about the suffering of change, that when we have change in our lives, it changes the structure, right? Things get sort of discombobulated, and there can be suffering from change, even if it's change that's good change, like we change a job, or you know, we have a good transition in our life. There is even some amount of discomfort that comes in that. And then the final piece that we talked about that causes suffering is the pain of, or the suffering of existence, of not really knowing the answer to the question, who am I? And I'm really interested in that piece because it's one that as you're on the path, it seems that we always come back to, who am I? And without regular practice, which is what I'm a huge proponent of, is having a strong regular practice. Without practice, it's very hard to discover the answer to that question for ourselves. We've also discussed in the past couple sessions that we've had together, times that we've met together, is this idea of gnosis, that everything that we're talking about here doesn't require you to believe any of it. What it does require, though, is for you to prove it to yourself so that you have gnosis. Gnosis is a Greek word which means knowing, knowledge, and it doesn't mean just knowing as in intellectual knowing. It means it's a type of knowing that comes from direct experience. And that's what we're looking for on the path to self-discovery, on the path to self-knowledge, on the path to freeing ourselves from suffering. We have to have knowledge. We have to have a direct felt experience. But that direct felt experience can only come from practice. And I've mentioned this before, that practice isn't about doing certain things. It's about doing things in a certain way. And that's what will allow us to evolve in our own consciousness, in our own lives. And so often people are in their practice, but they're doing it mechanically. And then they say, oh, meditation doesn't work. I've tried meditation, it doesn't work. Or I've tried, you can even look at physical practices, like I've tried running, or I've tried working out, or I've tried dieting, but it doesn't work. Whatever your practice is, if it's not working for you, I invite you to consider that it might not be the practice itself, but it might be how you are performing the practice, how you're actually doing the practice itself. Because especially in the case of things like meditation or mindfulness, these practices that are thousands of years old, they're proven. They are proven to work. And if they're not working for you, there's something within yourself about how you're actually performing the practice. It might be that you're doing it mechanically versus actually having the attention and the awareness and the effort behind and the will behind the practice that will get you to the next level. So all of that is preamble for what I want to go into today, which is the third noble truth. And we've been working from this book called Wake Up to Your Life by Ken MacLeod. I'm showing it to you on the screen. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, then it's Wake Up Your Life by Ken MacLeod. And we're going to look at the third noble truth. And let me just remind you that the way the Four Noble Truths come to us is sort of like a formula. And Ken MacLeod wrote this, which I think is a great way of describing it. So I'm just going to read it verbatim here. That the Four Noble Truths are, in fact, based on a simple problem-solving model, a model that dates far back in Indian philosophy and medicine. And this model is a series of 4 questions. The first question is, what is the problem? What's the problem that we're dealing with? The second question is, what is the root of that problem? The third question is there a solution to the problem? And then the fourth question is, how do you put the solution into effect? So we've already covered question number 1 a couple discussions ago. So question number 1, what is the problem? The problem is suffering, right? There's suffering in the world. We can't get away from that fact that there is suffering. Then last time we talked about what is the root problem, right? The root of the problem. And the root of the problem that we talked about yesterday is how we react to suffering. There's those things that cause suffering, but it's our reactions to suffering that cause, or reactions to those experiences that cause suffering. Our reactions can be, if you'll remember from last time, our reactions can be, either attraction, aversion, or sort of indifference. So if we have an experience that's pleasant, we feel attraction. Our reaction is some type of attraction. If we have an experience that's unpleasant, of course, we feel aversion from that experience. And if we have an experience that's neutral, we feel neutral, right? It's sort of boring, maybe. We feel that's our reaction to it. We feel indifferent. We feel bored. So today we're going to look at, is there a solution to the problem? And of course there's a solution to the problem. What is that solution? And that's what we're going to look at today. So again, straight from the book, Wake Up to Your Life, he says, the third noble truth is Buddha's powerful answer to that question. Is there a solution? Powerful answer is yes, there is a solution. Buddha himself saw that the sense of self, the I, and in the Western world we call it the ego, the I is the basis of emotional reaction, and that I, as a separate entity, doesn't exist. In other words, when the conditioning that underlies the sense of separation, this false duality of subject and object, is dismantled, then suffering ceases. And I pause there for a second just to really get what was just said there. I'm going to continue. He says, we cannot and do not end pain, but we can and do end suffering. So right there, we're getting something important, that there's actually this distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is something that we actually can't get rid of, but suffering is something that we can get rid of, because suffering is simply our reaction to the thing, the experience that causes us pain. We end suffering, he says, by ceasing to identify with what we are not, a pattern that interprets experience as separate and other, and then operates to control or justify its own imagined existence. So I want to pause there for a second and have you consider that this idea of who we are and answering the question, who am I, maybe should be turned around, and maybe there's this counterintuitive approach to answering that question. Maybe the question shouldn't be, who am I? Rather, what if we asked ourselves, who am I not? Who am I not? What would the answer to that question be? And I pose this right to myself as well. We're all in this together. We're learning this together. We're growing together. We're on the path together. So I just offer that as a counterintuitive approach to answering that question. So again, I'm going to reread that. We end suffering by ceasing to identify with what we are not. So what are we not? What we are not is we are not a pattern. We're not those patterned reactions. But so often we identify with our patterned reactions as who we are. Think about that for a moment. Our patterned reactions, as we talked about last time, come from, they're deeply conditioned from our experiences, from our past experiences, from our family history, from our culture, from our society. Those reactions, those patterned reactions that we end up calling our values and our beliefs are who we often identify with as who we are. So one of the biggest problems I have out there in the coaching world is when, this whole idea of being an authentic self and like, well, what are your beliefs? What are your values? And yes, that is a good point to begin there, but actually we aren't our beliefs. We aren't our values. We aren't the thing that we did in the past. And often that's how we identify with ourselves, and then that causes us suffering. Okay, so he goes on to talk about something that's really important, because the answer is yes, that we can end suffering. And how do we do that? And that's part of the path. And so we'll get more into this next time, but let's just begin here. We begin with attention, being mindful, having our attention be acutely aware of the present moment and what we're thinking, feeling, experiencing, how we're reacting. So he describes, or he defines attention in this way. He says, attention is the ability to experience what arises without falling into the conditioned reactions that cause suffering. Attention is always present in potential, but is unable to function because of conditioning. Now, it's not that it's not like that you have no access to attention, because sometimes we do. There are times in our lives when we've been able, and I'm sure you can think of a time, I invite you to think of a time in your life when you've been so present and had like full attention to what is happening in the moment. Maybe it was a discussion with a friend and it just felt like you were so present and in the moment, and time, there was no sense of time, and something mystical felt like it happened and you couldn't articulate it. You could never put words to it. That's the experience of being totally present. It's not like you're not there. It's, yeah, you're there, but you're so present and have such attention to what's going on and in the moment that everything else seems to cease to exist. So the invitation is for us to more and more practice attention in our lives, and to be able to experience everything without falling into conditioned reactions that cause suffering. Now, that is a very solid practice, and it is something that you can do in meditation, but it's something you can take into your waking life. And this is, I mean, if you're listening, you're probably going, oh, this sounds like mindfulness. Yes, this is mindfulness. In fact, mindfulness is the first step into meditation, which we'll talk about probably next time when we come together. But just pay attention to that, the importance of attention, right? So again, going back to what he's saying in the book here, and I like to use this because it's really, again, we go back to Buddha's life and what he was experiencing, what his life was, and how we can use it as an example for our own life. If you'll remember, a few times ago when we talked, I was sharing the story, or reading the story of the Buddha and how he was under the tree and he was getting to this point of like understanding the cause of suffering. And right at that point, Mara came, the demon of obsession came, and sort of gave Buddha these tests. So I'm going to read this little part just so that we can get this idea of attention. So in the account of Buddha's awakening, Mara, the demon of obsession, and his army represent patterns and conditioning. Buddha rested in attention, undistracted and undisturbed by the ploys and attacks of Mara. Remember, Mara sent him, beautiful women who were seducing him and, being seductive, and then armies to, try to induce fear in him. And yet Buddha remained completely undistracted and undisturbed. His attention penetrated Mara and his army so that he saw them and experienced them for what they are, movements in the mind. They fell apart and ceased to function. And that's actually exactly what will happen in our own lives when we're able to place that type of attention on what arises in our lives what type of experiences arise without falling into that reactive place. So he goes on to say, the reactive patterns that maintain the feelings of separateness, incompleteness, and lack of presence all arise from the fear of non-existence. These conditioned reactions maintain a world of illusion, a world of subject and object, which prevent the direct experience of being. Layer upon layer of reactive patterns form to maintain the illusion that each of us is a separate entity. Suffering is the subjective experience of all this emotional reactivity. And then finally, suffering ends when we have the sufficient ability and attention to be present in all experience, even the experience of not being a separate entity. So I'm going to end there for our discussion today. And then the next time we meet, I'll be talking a little bit more about the practices that we can use, or the primary practices, in order to achieve this attention, to be aware, to be mindful, in order to dismantle our reactivity to what arises in our life, because that is the way, as the Buddha said, to end all suffering in our own lives. And I just want to tie this back, that even though we're talking about suffering, we're also talking about understanding at the core who we really are. And this end of suffering requires us, in our own lives, requires us to have a deep understanding, a deep knowledge of who we really are. And the truth is, in my experience, that most of us don't know who we really are, and we think we know who we are, but we define ourselves, as I said earlier, by our conditions and our reactions and our values and our beliefs. And while those are good, to have some identity with values and beliefs, it can also be dangerous and limiting and lead us to suffering, and not to the ultimate place that we want to be in our lives. So just for now, I invite you to begin this practice of being aware, putting your attention on what arises, what type of reactivity you feel arising within yourself, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, or feelings and emotions, the same thing, that the thoughts and the feelings, the beliefs that arise at any point during your day when you have experiences, and to just notice what you notice about them. And that's it. No judgment. Just notice what you notice. And for some of you, this might be just a reminder, and you've done this many times before, and you've had this practice and just need the little prompt, oh yeah, I need to start doing that again. And for some of you, it might be, oh, I've never done that before. In either case, that's the invitation for today. And then we'll meet again next time, talk a little bit more about the practices involved. And that is it for today. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And I give a bow, namaste, and have a wonderful rest of your day.